In the meantime, Lisa, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for joining us again, because we met initially when you did a webinar for our members, our SERPA practitioners, didn't you? And it was so good. And I thought, we can't just keep this within our practitioner membership. We need to go live with this. So hence you've been invited back. And I just want to introduce you and you're from San Diego in America. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where you're living anyway at the moment. And so Lisa is a social worker, and she's a personal trainer, a yoga teacher, and nutritional health coach. And basically, you bring that all together in your work and your own personal experiences of losing and maintaining a 150-pound weight loss. And you bring that all together really to help people who have emotional eaters or chronic dieters. And I think that probably fits with most people, sort of emotionally eating at some point, me included. And so I really welcome you, Lisa, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I know, I had a great time presenting last time, and I'm just really excited to be back and that we get to share this with more people, make it more accessible, So thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you all, everyone who is here live, everyone who's watching this recording. Welcome. I'm happy you're here. And if at any point there are questions or anything that you want to share in the comments, please feel free to do that. I will, once we kind of officially kick off, I always think it's good to give a couple minutes just to let people kind of settle. Yeah. But once we really kick off, I will share an agenda for the 60, 90 minutes, whatever this turns into, that we're here together. And so we will have time for like official Q&A toward the end. But if there are questions along the way, I do want to just invite everyone who's here to share them. And then please, I know I'm just repeating what Georgie just said, but if you want to let us know that you're here, say hello. Thank you, Matthew and Pamela and Pippa and Joanne. It's so good to see you guys.
Americans are beating us so far. Come on, over here in the UK. Well, numbers are growing here. So come on, where are you all from? Let's have a few more from the UK showing up here.
We're just going to start it with a battle. Where is everyone
Pippa, well done, Pippa. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, and thank you for coming back. So good to see you. Yes, hi, Teresa. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Teresa. Yeah.
Madeline from Scotland. Cool. Cool. Great. And so I'm going to tell all of you who are watching this live, I was just saying before we started this, usually I am used to presenting either in person or on a Zoom call where I can see faces. So I'm asking you a favor to tell me that you're here in the chat, because I have no idea if you're here right now. I can't see your faces. So please let me know. And so glad to see it. Lynn from Bristol, Nicola.
Yeah, Joanne was born in Birmingham. Brilliant.
Yeah. Matthew says we're really good at overeating in the US. We sure are. I think that goes for a lot of us.
Yes, you can watch it later on. It will be recorded, and we'll add it onto our YouTube channel as well. And no doubt Lisa will be sharing it as well.
Yay.
So yeah, lovely to see you all. So we're coming up to a couple of dozen now, which is fabulous. So, and then obviously people will be listening to it later as well. Hi, Peter. Lovely to see you all here. So yes, any questions that you have, then Lisa, you'll be picking them up as you go along, or at the time that's right, whether that's after a session that you've talked about, or as they come through, because we can both see your comments. And so as and when the time's right, Lisa will answer the questions, and I'll just sit here and do whatever's required. Share your screen.
Yes. And thank you for doing that. We got to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so shall we make a start then, Lisa? Do you want to tell us what we're all going to be doing?
Kick it off. All right. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me do my thing. I always think it's just something really powerful that we get to do when we share space, whether it's virtually or, not live. It doesn't matter that we are here together to do something that is really important and healing and therapeutic if we're open to it. So I honor you for showing up. for yourself, ultimately, not just for me, but also mostly for you, and the people that you love, because as we work on ourselves, it really starts to affect just the way we show up in life and in other relationships. So seriously celebrating you, honoring you, and grateful for you being here for you. So in terms of an agenda, because I always say when I get on a call, especially a call that's more than like 20 minutes, I want to know what is the itemized list of things that are going on? What can I expect? So first of all things, I will intro myself, tell you a little bit about who I am, what I do, why I do what I do, and just my story of how I got here, so you know who you're working with. Second, I will teach. There are some things that I think are just really foundational to our understanding of the mind-body connection as it relates to emotional eating, chronic dieting, etc. So I want to teach you some things. I think knowledge is power, and I really believe a lot in psychoeducation around this work. So I'm going to teach you. Then we're going to move through a practice together. I will guide you through the whole thing. If you have or you want something to write with, I would say this is the invitation right now to go and grab a pen and paper. You can also, because you're here virtually, you can also do it, if you would rather type and use your computer or your phone or whatever it is, feel free to do that. But I do want you to just be prepared that we're going to work on something together, and I will ask you to have something to write with or type with. And then we'll have time to just reflect and discuss on what we've done here together, and then an open Q&A. So I love a question that I can answer in real time. So please feel free. Like I said before, if you have questions that are coming up as we go, there will be time designated at the end. But if you want to share them in the chat box, and it feels, like she said, a good time to just kind of like tap in and connect via Q&A as we go, I'm so open to doing that. I think Q&A is a really powerful way to teach, and just really meet you where you are with what is present for you as you listen to this. So please, I welcome that. So that's our agenda today. Before we jump into anything, though, I do want to ask you to utilize the chat box again. You've already told me where you're from, which thank you. I appreciate that. It is so cool that we're representing like the whole world. Doing things virtual is amazing to me. So thank you for sharing that. But I also want to practice, and this will kind of come back to later in the presentation, but I want to ask all of you that are here right now in real time for your 2-word check-in. So just identifying, this is like, again, the beginning of the practice. If you check in with yourself, again, for some of you, it's evening, for some of you, it's morning, wherever you're coming from, maybe you're rushing, maybe you're settling, and maybe right now you're feeling really anxious or nervous. Maybe you're feeling really happy and excited. Maybe you're feeling kind of sad and angry. Or maybe you're feeling happy and sad. Or maybe you're feeling excited, grateful, and angry. Whatever it is. But I want to really just kind of like initiate the practice of you taking a moment to check in with yourself and not just say, I'm fine, I'm good. Right? Because that's where most of us live. We have, especially as adults, we have the emotional vocabulary that for many of us is limited to like 2 or 3 or maybe 5 words, right? Good, bad, and fine. And so I want to just invite you in this moment to actually practice embodying something different. That is, how are you actually? How are you really? And it doesn't need to sound good. It doesn't need to be positive. You could say, this is the worst day of my whole life. Whatever it is, this is an opportunity for you to practice authenticity. Okay. So that's where I want to start. Joanne, grateful and excited. Okay. Oh, wait, Georgie, you're still here, I think.
I'm still here.
Okay. I was like, I saw you disappear.
We can have you there on your own without me.
Okay.
And I couldn't get a word in edgeways, so I just did it.
Awesome. Thank you. We're figuring it out. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we have grateful, excited, curious, rushed, excited, and a bit overwhelmed, hopeful, calm, motivated, happy, sick, tired, anxious, overwhelmed, calm, curious. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Stressed and overwhelmed. Okay. Ooh, it's 11:11 here. This is like a magical little time we have. Tired and interested. Okay. So thank you for sharing. I'm always curious, especially when I can't see your faces. I want to know how you're doing. I would say that I am feeling grateful and nervous and also excited. Um, okay, so that's our 2-word check-in. Now, who am I? Who am I and why am I here talking to you? My name is Lisa Schlosberg. I these days call myself a trauma-informed health coach because I do really primarily do health coaching, but it really comes from a trauma-informed mind, body, holistic, energetic approach to healing. So it's a trauma-informed holistic health coach. But I will tell you, I will back up a little bit and tell you, like Georgie shared originally, when I first started working with people one-on-one, it was in the capacity of a personal trainer. At the time, I knew that I loved working out and I knew that I loved helping people. And I was very lost after college and didn't know what exactly I wanted to do. So I became a personal trainer. That's how I started working with people. And as I started working with people in that capacity at a gym, I started seeing and realizing that the biggest struggles and obstacles that my clients had were not physical. The biggest struggles that the people I were working with had were more mental and emotional and social. And I started finding myself getting more and more interested in not just the physical body. So, how can I help people get strong and fit and healthy? But really, what was going on with the whole human being? What was going on in the mental, emotional, spiritual, social arenas of these people's lives? And so that's what led me to my integrative nutrition, holistic health coaching certification, which really was very holistic in nature. So I started looking at all these different parts of the human, and I started to shift into what at the time I called holistic personal training or mind body personal training. It wasn't really a thing yet at the time, so I didn't know what to call it, but I started working with people individually, privately outside of the gym, and I started to experience the way that I could serve people again, not just physically, but really talking about what else was going on in their lives, mentally and emotionally. Where were they feeling blocked or stuck or confused or helpless or powerless? Like, what were those things that were getting in the way of them achieving goals that they had physically? So that's how it started to kind of broaden. From that point, then I got my master's in social work. So I was starting to be trained as a mental health professional and as a therapist, ultimately, to work with people one on one in that capacity. And so, again, it just started getting deeper and deeper into the mind body connection, emotional health, mental health, psychology, child development, all these things, the brain science behind all of it. And I will tell you a little bit more about my personal story after this, but that's where I started working with Nicole Sachs, who some of you are familiar with, who does a lot of the mind body TMS, chronic pain healing. We linked up at a retreat years ago, and I started taking all of this real mind body work and connecting it to the work I was already doing with people and learning a tremendous amount about, why we were actually in pain, why we were stuck, why we were eating, why we were not eating, and things like that. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am in a professional way, and who I am in terms of my titles and credentials, and why the work that I do is, again, trauma informed, holistic mind body, but specifically around food and eating, body image, and weight. So that's who I am and who I work with ultimately right now. And then most recently, a couple of years ago, I did my teacher training in yoga, which just really helped me deepen my understanding of the human body in a very different way. And how all of this, being a system of energy and a mind, body, soul being, has everything to do with our wellness and our health. So that's what I do. But I will again back up and tell you more about my personal story and how and why I ended up here, really specifically using this work around food and eating. And I always like to say, if you don't already know or aren't already familiar with me, I do have a podcast. It's called the Out of the Cave podcast with Lisa Schlosberg. I don't know if I can add things in the comments here or if
I can do
something
that.
will. Okay, so
Mhm.
I can share a link with you after. We can post on the Facebook page after. I just want you to know that if you're listening to my story and you're like, wow, I want to hear a 3-hour version of this, it exists in the first 2 episodes of the podcast. So there's obviously so much to say about how I ended up here. And that's why I just always want to invite you to the longer version of the long story. But today, for the sake of time, I will kind of go through what I think are probably the most important bullet points. Again, just so you have an idea of who I am and why I'm the one speaking to you today. So I always like to say, it all begins at the beginning. Georgie mentioned earlier, I lost 150 pounds, but especially when it comes to weight and especially when it comes to weight loss, the story does not begin with weight loss. The story for me began and always begins with weight gain, right? If there's weight to lose, how do we gain it to begin with? So we have to just kind of start there. And for me, that begins very, very early in my life. So growing up, I always like to split it into like what was going on physically and what was going on mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially. Okay. So what was going on physically in the visible dimension? I always say what's visible and what's invisible, because we have so many parts of us as a multi-dimensional, multi-layered, complex human being. So what was going on physically with me was I like to eat and I like to not pay attention to what I was eating. And my relationship with food and eating was such that I ate what I wanted. I ate however much I wanted, whenever I wanted. And I didn't see the problem with that. I just ate because it was good and I paid really very little attention to it. And in hindsight, I understand that I was very disconnected and dissociated, not just from my relationship with food, but ultimately from my body and my feelings and my life in general. And so I ate, and it was not really a conscious thing. And so that's how, for as long as I can remember, I always say, like, as soon as I could remember being a human, I was weighing too much. I weighed too much according to my doctors, and I was always feeding myself too much. I was always eating too much. But again, none of this was on my radar, and I didn't care, and I was very in denial about the whole thing. Growing up, there were times, many, many times actually, where my parents, my doctors, nutritionists, dietitians tried to get me to go on a diet, tried to get me to lose weight. And ultimately, after about maybe a week or 2 weeks max of trying to commit to some sort of weight loss, I ultimately decided that it just wasn't worth it. I didn't want to stop eating the things I wanted to eat. I didn't want to pay attention. I didn't want to be present in my body. And so I didn't. And that's how my weight just kind of continued to climb and climb and climb my whole life. And ultimately, I was just over 300 pounds when I was 17 years old. And I know, like, from last time we had this conversation, for you, for some of you here, that's kilos, which I think is close to like 150-ish kilos, right? Because it's kind of like divided by 2. So needless to say, however that pans out mathematically, I was in a much larger body and I was morbidly obese most of my childhood. And what was going on emotionally, so that's what was going on physically. I ate and ate whenever I want to. I didn't pay attention to dieting or weight loss. It was no interest of mine. I was very in denial about all of it. And I was very overweight. But emotionally, what was going on? Well, if you asked me at the time, if you asked me at the time while I was a kid, while I was a teenager, I was fine. I was happy. Everything was good. I didn't need help from anyone. Everything just was what it was. It was fine. It was fine. It was fine. I am fine. And I really identified with being okay. I didn't want anyone to worry about me. I definitely did not want to share or express anything vulnerable. I thought feelings were stupid. I thought therapy was a joke. I thought anything that was related to mental and emotional health was just a waste of time. I didn't get it, let alone anything that had anything to do with spirituality. I was just not involved. And ultimately, again, I lived in a state of just defense and denial and dissociation. I didn't want to feel things I didn't want to feel. And I was very, very, very good at being very defended against anything that would come up emotionally, and including and especially what was going on with my weight, my relationship toward not just my weight and obesity, but any emotions that were uncomfortable for me was, if I don't want to feel it, I'm not going to. If I don't want to think about it, I'm not going to. And things would come up and then I would stuff them down. I stuffed them down with food. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know that that's how it was all operating. But that's why I think it's important to really just identify what was going on physically and what was going on mentally and emotionally, because while they were happening at the same time, I saw no connection between them at all. I wasn't interested. And then I went to college, and again, long story short, it was the first time that I was really alone with myself. I had moved out of my childhood home. I had moved away from my family. That, again, in hindsight, I know had everything to do with what happened next, which was I went on a diet myself. It was the first time it was self-motivated. And I ended up losing 150 pounds. And sometimes I say there was nothing magical about it. I was told my entire life as an overweight child to eat less and exercise more. And so I got to a point where I was in charge of taking care of myself. And I said, okay, I will do exactly that. And because I am a go-getter and a hard worker and an A+ student, and I love a gold star, what I did was I ate less and I exercised more. And I just didn't know at the time that there could even be such a thing as eating too little and exercising too much. My, again, entire childhood, I was never told that. I was never taught that. And no one, in my experience, looks at a 300-pound 17-year-old and says, you might want to watch out for how much you exercise. It was just not on my radar at all that there was such a thing as malnourishment, or that I could ever get myself to a place of starvation. But that is exactly what happened. I really swung the pendulum from one side to the other. And instead of overeating, I was undereating. Instead of under exercising, I was over exercising. And it really turned into, I was 150 pounds lighter, but I was the least healthy and the least happy I had ever been in my life, which was shocking and disappointing, to say the absolute least. So that's where, for me, things got very interesting, because I was told by, not just my parents and doctors, but the world, the whole world, the culture, the society that raised me, that if I lost weight, I would be healthy. And if I lost weight, I would be happy. But neither of those things happened. I was struggling with a lot of symptoms of starvation. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't poop. My hair was falling out. I lost my menstrual cycle for almost a couple of years, and my body just wasn't functioning. I remember, like, I would stand up and just get very dizzy. I was seeing black spots. I was trying to study in college and I couldn't retain anything, and it just felt like my brain and my body were not working, and I had no idea why. It turns out I was just severely underfed and over exercising. And so that's where, again, things got interesting for me, because as soon as I actually started working with a nutritionist, and she was the person who said, if you're no longer getting your period, we have to really stop prioritizing weight loss. We need to actually really help your body recover. And that was, again, mind blowing to me, because all this happened very, very quickly. But then, as soon as I started really trying to restore my body and my health, every time I ate a little bit more, I was out of control and I couldn't stop eating. And then I would go back on a diet and lose it again. And then I would eat a little bit more and I was out of control overeating. And then I would go back on a diet, restrict myself, and be under eating. And so now I'm doing the thing that many of us are probably familiar with, which was lose 10, gain 15, lose 15, gain 20. Every time it went down, it went back up plus some, to a point where I had probably gained back like 50 pounds or so, which is, again, like 20, 25 kilos or something like that. And I was starting to get really scared. I was starting to get really scared, because while I was losing weight, I thought, I have so much willpower and I have so much discipline and I'm doing so great at this. And then all of a sudden, once I started to really kind of zoom out and have to pay attention to my health and restoring my body, I was completely out of control again. And I felt like I had no idea what was going on with myself. And so I started doing research. I was always, like I said earlier, I didn't identify myself as an emotional person or a spiritual person. I was very hard fact. I like data. I want to know what's going on. So I started researching. And some of this is like what I want to teach you, some of what I kind of found along the way, because it didn't make sense to me. The cultural narrative around weight loss was that, 98% of people who lose weight the way I did gain it all back plus some. But the story that I was hearing was, that we like lack willpower and discipline. And that didn't make sense to me. It was like, I just lost 150 pounds on a diet. Do I really believe that 98% of people who've done it this way just wake up one day and lose all their willpower? Like, there's got to be something more. There's got to be something deeper to this. And that's when I started figuring out, and again, researching more about the mind-body connection. So again, those of you who are here, because I always like to just get an idea, those of you who are here in the chat box, how many of you are familiar with the ACE study? The ACE study is the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. It came out in 1997. So you can just say yes or no, or a little bit, or a lot of it, or whatever it is. If you are still here, I got one of these for Scott. Thank you. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so you're all familiar. Okay, great. Looks like you're all familiar at this point so far with the ACE study, which doesn't surprise me at all because this is a mind-body community. But for any Teresa, only because I taught you. Okay, great. So there's someone who is not. Awesome. Either way, I'm going to explain it, but it's great, just to know who I'm talking to. So the Adverse Childhood Experience Study was, again, released in 1997. And what it did was basically prove that all these things that happen in our body later in life, so everything from heart attack to stroke to suicide, addiction, all these different things that happen as health issues later in life can be traced back to correlated with early childhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences. And so it was this big study that really came out and shifted, revolutionized the medicine in general, but especially around addiction, because what the ACE study started to really do was really introduce the idea that when people are struggling as adults later in life, it's not really helpful to ask the question, what's wrong with this person? Why can't I just stop smoking cigarettes? Why can't I just stop drinking alcohol? Why can't I just stop eating? What's wrong with me? Right? Which again, especially in the diet culture, is what we're raised to believe. That is, if you're emotionally eating or you're overeating or compulsively eating, there's something wrong with you. And so the ACE study actually suggested, instead of asking the question, what's wrong with someone, we want to start asking the question, what happened to this person? What happened early on in their life? And what happened that, food and eating, for example, but maybe drugs and alcohol or other things became the survival mechanism? What happened early on in life that eating, for me, became the thing that helped me feel safe or helped me feel comfortable or helped me feel protected? Okay. And so there's a lot we could say about the ACE study, but really what it did, the way that I interpret it, was it kind of proved, because it was a study of 17,000 adults, that there is a connection between the mind and body. And when things are going on in the body, it's not just a physical dimension issue. And what it requires is really a mind-body approach to healing. And so when I found the ACE study in my studies or my research, I was absolutely mind blown. Not because it didn't make sense to me or because it felt too out there, but because it made sense of my own lived experience to me. And it was one of the first things ever, right? Like I said earlier, it's like I didn't really resonate with like diet culture messaging around like I'm a failure and I'm the problem. Like that never felt true. But when I found the ACE study and I started asking myself these questions, like, well, where did it all begin for me? Right? Diet culture doesn't ask, where did you begin? It doesn't ask where the story starts. It just says, okay, you have weight on your body, you want to get it off, let's do something about it, right? So I started getting curious. And then the reason it was so mind-blowing to me was because it made so much sense of my own lived, felt experience. That is, when I zoomed out and I looked all the way back, where did food and eating become a survival mechanism for me? Where did food and eating and weight gain become where I felt safe? And I had answers. this was the first time I actually had answers. And the story is, again, you're welcome to listen to the longer version of it on the podcast. But when I was 5 years old, my baby sister was born. She was born 3 months early, and then she passed away after 5 months. And so when I started looking back on my own story and what happened in my childhood, and that was part of my ACE score, which is, the traumas we collect as children, it started making sense to me. So I knew I had been through this big T trauma. I knew that everyone in my family had as well. And I knew that when I was 5 years old, I didn't have the support that I needed to process that kind of grief. I didn't have the resources, the capacity, the skills, the tools. I didn't have a therapist. I didn't have help. I didn't have what I needed. And so what happened was I really remember, and this is something I consciously remember, was that was really where it began for me, that when a thought about Rebecca popped up, I would consciously decide to not think about it. I would choose to distract myself. I would choose avoidance. I would choose distraction and escape and denial and dissociation and disconnection. And that was the beginning of really planting the seed internally that when things came up that felt uncomfortable, I knew what to do. I knew how to get out of it, avoid, distract, numb, soothe, comfort myself. And my drug of choice was food and eating. And I always say, so I found the ACE study. And when I started digging a little bit deeper into it and it started making all this sense, I saw the studies and the research that really suggests that eating disorders, obesity, emotional eating all work the same as other addictions. That some people use drugs and alcohol to self-soothe, right? But I was 5 years old. I didn't have access to drugs and alcohol and gambling and cigarettes, but I did have access to food. And I have to eat every day. We have to eat every day. And so that's why, again, mentally, emotionally, what was going on internally was if I feel discomfort, I'm just going to find a way out of it. And then what was happening physically, visibly, was that I was just eating everything I wanted all the time. And again, no, none of my doctors, nutritionists, dietitians knew to ask these questions. No one was getting curious about what was going on with me, the human, what was going on internally. I was just kind of confronted with the story that there was something wrong with me and that I had to eat less and exercise more. And so, while all of this is happening, I'm putting together, again, from many, many different avenues, the same kind of message that I have to start focusing on stress reduction. I have to start focusing on emotional regulation. I have to start really focusing on feeling my feelings so that I don't eat them. And I've already lost 150 pounds at this point. And if I want to maintain my weight loss and not keep eating and dieting and gaining and losing and gaining and losing and gaining and losing, what I really have to do is stop kind of spinning the wheel in the physical dimension and really get curious about how I can support myself and heal mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially. And this is where I started doing things like journaling all the time. I was going to see my therapist. I was really processing a lot of what was going on. And I was doing my best to strengthen my mind body connection, which at that point I realized was very important. So I started practicing things like breath work and meditation and yoga and all these things that if you told me, years prior, I would have rolled my eyes and laughed at. Now I saw, again, very long story short, that the more I really focused on paying attention to bringing my stress down, regulating my emotions, really healing my nervous system. And I didn't have the language for any of this. Like, I didn't know that what I was doing was somatic healing, but that's really what was going on. The more I saw that my weight and my body was kind of effortlessly just maintaining itself. I wasn't getting on the scale. I wasn't counting my calories. I wasn't dieting anymore. I saw how addictive that also was. And my goal became just taking care of myself as a human being. And that required an awareness of what I was feeding myself, sure, and exercise and all of these things physically, but I was balancing it now with mental and emotional and other kinds of health, let's say. And so again, this is kind of the long story short around how I ended up doing this and why I'm doing this, specifically around food and eating. And then the other kind of part of the story, what brings me here actually specifically, is after my weight loss, then I started struggling with IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. I had a lot of digestive issues, and this is also what kind of connected me with Nicole Sachs and the TMS approach around chronic pain. Was I tried everything that the Western medical model had to offer. I tried every different, I got all the tests done. I did all the medication. I did all the diets. I did all the things, and nothing was helping me heal internally again. And so it just kind of was an invitation for me to go deeper and deeper and deeper into things like journaling and breath work and somatic healing. And now, again, all of that is why I do what I do. So I always like to say, just to, again, kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from in terms of how I teach this. I always, and I'm happy to share this as a resource separately. If you want to, you can always email me for it. But I have an image of a pendulum that I always kind of go back to. It's very foundational to the work that I do. And I teach it in my program. That is, on one side of the pendulum, we have things like emotional eating, stress eating, overeating, undereating, mindless eating. And then when these eating behaviors get our attention, right? When you find that you're overeating or emotionally eating, well, if you're anything like me, these are the things that get your attention. And then what happens is we swing the pendulum to the other side. The other side looks like now there's a hyper focus on food and eating. So you're on a diet, you're counting calories, you're hitting your macros, you're, aware of like every calorie in and out, you're over exercising. And then most of us spend decades, if not an entire lifetime, kind of swinging the pendulum back and forth. Then we're overeating again because that was unsustainable. And then we're freaking out about that. We meet it with fear and judgment and shame, and then we swing the pendulum back, right? And then we just go back and forth, but none of it is sustainable. And the reason that I'm starting here, and part of what I want to teach you, is because the reason that doesn't work, the reason we need to have a trauma-informed mind, body, soul, energetic approach to really understanding and healing our relationship with food is because if we go back to the beginning of the pendulum, right? Well, what is emotional eating? Emotional eating indicates to us that we're not paying attention to our emotions, right? That's not a food and eating issue. That's an emotional thing. The same is true for stress eating. What is stress eating? Well, we're not paying attention to our stress, right? What are our stressors and what are other ways that we can cope with that and manage and regulate our stress that isn't food and eating? That's not a food thing. That's not a weight thing, right? It's just the root of it is the disconnect around stress and emotion. But then also the same is true with being just dissociated and disconnected from our lived felt embodied experience. What is overeating? We're not paying attention to the fact that we're full. What is under eating? We're not paying attention to the fact that we're hungry. And what is mindless eating? We're just not paying attention. But so I'm saying all this because all these things that are really, they seem to be issues with food in the physical dimension are not actually issues with food. They're really showing us that there's a disconnect between mind and body. That is, when there's emotion, when there's stress, when there's physical sensations, we're not paying attention to or honoring those things. We're not getting our needs met on a deeper level. And then it kind of overflows into our relationship with food. Okay. So I always say it's like, that's one side of the pendulum. The other side of the pendulum is the hyper focus on food. But just like in my experience, right, all of this comes from my own lived experience of this. At no point does that process get us deeper in connection with ourselves. And so we can swing the pendulum back and forth without ever having to get curious about what's going on mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially for us. And so the middle of the pendulum, I would say, is you have a mindfulness around food and eating. We don't want to be completely mindless about it. That option of, at least again, if you're anything like me, it's like the best case scenario at a certain point was like, I never have to think about food ever again. And that's actually not really a realistic expectation because you're a human being and you have to think about food because you survive on food. So the middle of the pendulum, for us to find peace and stability and safety where we're not swinging it back and forth, we want to have an awareness and a mindfulness around food, but we also want to balance that and pair that with an awareness and a mindfulness around us as the, again, multidimensional, complex, layered, nuanced human being and all the feelings that are coming up along the way. Okay, so our thoughts, our beliefs, our feelings, and the somatic experience of being in our bodies. So that is who I am and my story in brief. And again, why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I would explain in brief the work that I do. So again, before anything, I want to check back in with you, those of you that are here, and just let me know if there are any questions so far. curious, as always, again, because I can't see your faces, if there are not just questions, but I'm just curious how that lands. Does all of that make sense? Any thoughts, feelings, reflections? Thank you, Teresa. That just want to be seen and heard right now. We'll just take a minute to like pause and check in. I'll have a sip of water. I invite you to have a sip of water. Take a deep breath. And yeah, just let me know how that sounds. And again, if it all makes sense, and if there's anything you want clarified about my story, where I'm coming from, I'm happy to do that.
So beautifully explained, Lisa.
Thank you. Okay, all makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Totally. Thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. Cool. Okay. Thank you for participating. Okay, Jen says, I would like to quote you, but I can't quite remember what you said. Something like emotional eating is not a problem with food. It's a relationship with emotion issue. So I will tell you the quote that I say all the time. I would call this like one of my taglines is, if the biggest problem you have with food is that you're an emotional eater, it's not a problem you have with food. It's a question about how you're coping with your emotions. And I'm happy to share that with you again. I'm happy to write that out. You can email me. I'll give you all the taglines. And again, invitation to listen to the podcast, because you will definitely hear it on there. Another thing that I sometimes say that has landed with people is just because the hunger isn't physical doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that it can't be satiated with food. So sometimes when we talk about it's really a question of like, what am I hungry for? And sometimes that's helpful for people to just know there's a distinction that means, just because the hunger isn't physical doesn't mean it's not real. It's just in other areas of life. Can I throw it in the chat? Georgie, do you know how I can access the chat?
If you've not got it there on the right-hand side so that you can type in it.
I can see the chat, but I don't have the option of adding something into it.
Okay, you could put it in the private chat to me if you like, and then I can add it in, or we can add it in at the end. It's up to you.
Okay. I will type this out and then we can keep going with food. And then if there are any other questions, let me know. There might be a typo in this. I should really have all of these on like a PDF or something. This is good inspiration for that. Okay.
You can always add a link at the bottom of the video anyway when we posted.
Okay, here we go. And then I will also say, just because I'm taking a moment to quote myself here, that I also just want to shout out that when I say, if the biggest problem you have with food is that you're an emotional eater, it's not a problem with food. It's a question about emotions. I just want to really expand that to not just what's going on emotionally, but really tapping into the understanding that we as humans are a system of energy. Okay. So the reason I'm saying that is because we not only, here's another tagline, okay, we can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution, is something I'm always saying, right? So if we're eating to cope with our emotions, we can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. We need an emotional solution for the emotional problems. And so I'm just saying that because some of the time it's not just that we have emotional problems, but rather also that we have like an energetic imbalance, let's say. So it's not just, right, you can use the example of like, you had a really tough day and you're feeling stressed out and upset, and you come home and eat to cope with that. We can call that an emotional problem. But what I've also seen in my years of doing this is that sometimes it's not explicitly an emotional issue, but rather that you spent an entire day go, and your nervous system is on overdrive. And then you come home and food and eating can help you soothe that you've been, again, kind of just like on overdrive all day. And that's what I would call more of like an energetic problem than an emotional problem. But either way, we can't solve an energetic problem or an emotional problem with a physical solution. What we really need is an energetic solution, an emotional solution. So it means a lot of things. It can encompass a lot of things. It's not just emotion, the way that we think about it in terms of like, again, happy, sad, scared, overwhelmed, we can create a sense of danger and fear if we are, again, anything like me, really hardworking, like go, 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 go. That can also create a sense of imbalance that we can use food and eating to cope with, is what I'm saying. So I hope all of that makes sense. It looks like it does. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And the quote, it's funny because we always like confuse this. It's, you can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. So it's just flipped. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
We caught that. It's okay. Thank you, Georgie. Thank you for translating. And again, if anyone wants, to come back and have a conversation about any of this, you are more than welcome to. And again, I'm very inspired to just have this list on my website. So I will be updating that myself. Okay. So friends, let's keep going, shall we? Okay. So that's my story. Now what I want to teach to you, I have a few bullet points. And I'm going to boil this down into, I think, maybe 2 or 3 of just things that are important for your own understanding, right? You probably are learning things and things are dropping in as you listen to my own story and just, inevitably are applying it to yourself because we are humans and we see ourselves in one another. But what I want to explicitly teach you is the first thing is, let's call this the first bullet point. And I'm curious again, I will ask you to use the chat box, and thank you for participating. How many of you have heard the phrase before, you are a spiritual being having a physical experience? Is this a familiar concept to you? Something you already know or are familiar with? Scott, I'll answer your question at the end. It's a good one. Thank you for asking. How many of you are familiar with the saying, you are a spiritual being having a physical experience? Okay, so we have a no, we have a love that, we have a yes. Thank you. So, okay, yes, of course. Yes, Nicole Sachs. Okay, so the reason I'm starting here is because, again, I think when it comes especially to food and eating, the way that I see it, what we really need to do is like zoom all the way out, right? We're not going to focus on food and eating, but we're really here to talk about what it is to be a human. Because when we have a better idea of what it is to be a human being, we can have a much better idea of what's going on around food and eating in our bodies. So I start with this understanding that you are a spiritual being having a physical experience. And ultimately what that means, you can come at this from a very spiritual lens, or you can come at this from a very scientific lens, but it's really all saying the same thing. That is, you are a system of energy. Okay. So energy, right? Electricity is the thing that connects mind to body, the nervous system connecting mind to body. Why is it that I can talk and speak and move right now? Because there are electricity, there are signals, right, going through my body, the synapses in my brain. We are wired through energy and we function through energy. So you can think of it that way, or you can think of it again from a more spiritual lens of just, again, energy or intuition or instincts, right? The way that we're animals at the end of the day. We have instincts, and there are parts of us that we can't see or touch or track or measure, right? There's all these parts of us. And so that's what it means to me, that you are a spiritual being, right? That could, again, land differently with everyone, the word spiritual sometimes, but either way, that's what it means. But our physical experience, okay, you're having a physical experience, right? Well, what does that mean? This is it. This is the body that you have. This is the home that you live inside of while you're here as a spiritual being in this, on this planet today, in this lifetime. This is what it means. You're in a physical experience. And so I think of this, the body, as not just the home for our soul, spirit, essence, energy, whatever we are, however you want to call it. But I think of it, I love the phrase like meat suit or earth suit, right? This is like the suit that I have while I'm here that houses my experience as a human. And so I just want to start there because, again, our bodies are not here to look a certain way or be a certain weight or shape or size. Our body's purpose is to hold the essence and the spirit of who we are as a human being. Okay, so you're a spiritual being having a physical experience. That's what that means to me. But now I want to complicate it a little bit more because, again, I don't want to sugarcoat anything. And there's a lot going on here in the human experience we need to understand before we can really have an understanding of what's going on in our relationship with food. So spiritual being, physical experience, but you have an animal brain and you live in a social context. Okay. So again, just in terms of you understanding your own relationship with food and eating in your body, we need to look at all these parts. And so what does it mean that you have an animal brain? Speaking of an animal brain, my animal, Neville the cat, is here behind the computer. If you have ever worked with me, you're very familiar with Neville, who shows up everywhere. So if you see me trying to finagle, that's what's going on here. The animal brain, okay, here's why this matters. Here's why I need to put this on your radar. Is because the animal brain, or the amygdala, is the part of the brain that we share with a lizard, okay? So what it's doing is always, always, always scanning everything in your environment. And this could be your thoughts and your feelings and your experiences and your physical sensations and your relationships and your stressors and your job and your relationship, everything, everything. Everything in your human life is being filtered into your animal brain as either safe or dangerous, okay? Because your animal brain doesn't know anything about how happy you are and how cool you are and how successful you are and how much money's in your bank account, none of those things are going on in your animal brain. The only thing your animal brain cares about is this good for your survival, or is this threatening your survival? Is this helping you feel safe, or is this creating more danger? That's basically how it works. But so we need to understand that while we're out here living this human life, and 3 to 5% of what goes on in our brain is conscious to us, all the other things that are going on are not in our conscious awareness. Here's Neville. So we need to understand that, because the example I always give is, if you're out here living your human life and you are running late in traffic on the way to work and you hit a red light, okay, all of a sudden your stress starts to rise, right? Oh my God, I have to get there. I have to get there. My boss is going to kill me, right? You're going through that, but your animal brain doesn't know the difference between stressors. So what that means is that your animal brain doesn't know the difference between you sitting at a red light in traffic and an animal coming after you in the jungle. And so all day long, we start to kind of accumulate this level of stress, because we're constantly in this mindset, whether we know it or not, that things are going to kill us, even though they aren't, right? And then we have our fight, flight, freeze, fawn stress response constantly acting up or being triggered by things in our human life, even though they're not actually going to kill us and they're not actually life threatening. Okay. So again, we need to know that. But even just for a moment, if you consider what that means in your relationship with food and eating, right? Sometimes our relationship with food and eating, especially if you've struggled with it, especially if you've had weight issues throughout your life, it can feel so scary. It can feel so life or death. It can feel so charged and heavy and hard. And there's a reason for that. It's not because you're being dramatic. It's not because you're oversensitive. It's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because there's a part of your brain that thinks you are literally going to die. And that's okay. Okay. So part of that, right? Now we have a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain. There's already a lot to deal with. But the last piece of this is that you live in a social context. You live in a social context. So the thing that we need to talk about here is that, well, what does it mean to live in a social context? Well, it means different things depending on where in the world you are. It means different things depending on when in the world you are, right? The culture changes as time goes on. But the reason we need to look at this is because from 0 to 5, 0 to 7 or 8-ish, while your brain is developing, you're taking in messages from the culture, from society, everything from, really direct messaging from mom and dad, perhaps, to really indirect messaging from the commercials on TV and the magazines you read as a kid, right? We're taking in all these messages about how to human. How do we do it here? How do I survive as a human being in this kind of world? Okay. And we get these messages about how to be good and how to be bad. We get messages about behavior that makes us acceptable and unacceptable. We get messages, now it's connected directly to food and eating in our body. We get messages, not just about how to eat, but how to look, how to be, how to behave, what body type to be, what weight to be, what size to be. We get all these messages and we internalize them, okay? And the important thing about this is that it's inevitable. From 0 to 5, 0 to 7, you're not taking these messages and looking at them and questioning them and challenging them and saying, do I really believe this? We don't have critical thinking skills at that age. We just take them in as fact. We take them in as truth. But the reason we need to know this, and I want to really empower you with the education around this, is because of what I call the macro to micro effect. what does it mean that you're taking these messages from the macro, the culture, and what is the effect that it has on your micro experience? So really your brain science, your nervous system. And the reason, again, I'm saying all this is because if we connect it again, just to specifically your body, we learn about good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't, acceptable, unacceptable. But the animal brain doesn't know any of that. The animal brain is taking all these messages and filtering them into safe or dangerous. And so what that means is that if we start to, for example, gain weight, we don't just feel uncomfortable. We feel out of control and in danger. It can feel, again, if I speak to my own experience, it can feel life-threatening because, again, we've been taught that it's unacceptable or that it's not the way we should be, or whatever the story is that you picked up along the way. And again, your animal brain doesn't know that. So this is what it means to be a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context, right? There's a lot going on. And so when there is, a trigger that comes up around our body or our weight or our appearance, we can react in our nervous system, right? You may not even be aware of this consciously, but we may react as though it's going to literally kill us because it can feel very life or death, even though it isn't, right? And so just taking a moment to consider, what does that mean for you? What has that meant for you along the way of living in a human body in this kind of culture with the messages you received around food and weight and your body, right? And there's no right or wrong to this, and you don't have to share it in the chat box, though you are welcome to, but just really taking a moment to let it land, and just really see what comes up when you consider what this has meant for you. Because I think, again, I love the way like Georgie introduces me by saying this kind of applies to every single one of us. How conscious we are of it, or how, interested we are in it might be different, but we're all here and we're all spiritual beings with a physical experience and an animal brain in a social context. So that's the first bullet point that I want to share with you. The second bullet point is kind of building on that idea. And this is going to, I'm going to really paraphrase something by Dr. Gabor Mate. So always curious, again, in the chat box, how many of you are familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate? He is probably, I know at least the last time I did this with Serpa, it was like, yes, 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 yes. We love Dr. Gabor Mate, which again is not surprising to me based on just the community that we're in right now. But okay, we have familiar. Let me know. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, yes. Okay. So if you're not familiar, you don't need to be, but Dr. Gabor Mate, love his work as well, is basically a trauma and addiction specialist. And so if you are interested, yes, from Canada, yes. So if you want more on that, he has fabulous books and there's so much you can learn from him. But one of his, let's say, concepts that I steal from him and love to teach and is really foundational to my understanding of this work is when he talks about attachment and authenticity. And so the reason I bring this up is because he explains how, from birth, humans have a need for attachment, right? We are not, he compares this to reptiles. Reptiles hatch out of the egg and they know how to walk and be and survive. Human beings are very different, right? Mammals are different, but especially humans, we are the most dependent and reliant on attachment of any animal, right? We don't know how to do anything for ourselves as babies, and we need to be attached to our caregivers to make sure that we survive and stay alive. And so that is one of his, again, just kind of foundational understandings of how the human works. We have a need for attachment, not a want or a desire for attachment, a need biologically to be connected and attached. The other need that we have is for authenticity, which is really to be who we are, to tell the truth, to say, these are my thoughts, these are my feelings, this is who I am, this is the honest experience that I'm having, right? And so he says, in his video, and if you want to see this 4-minute video, it's beautiful. I use it in my program. Just go to YouTube and type in Gabor Mate attachment authenticity. You will see it. And he'll explain this. But he explains how, okay, great. So, so far, so good. We have a need for attachment. We have a need for authenticity. But then what we have to really talk about is what happens when these two are in conflict with each other. What happens when I want to be authentic, But if I tell the truth about how I feel and what I think, it may threaten this survival relationship that I have, or this relationship on which I perceive my life to depend. And so the example can be, anything that looks like, a kid or a teenager or a young adult or an old adult, whatever, who says, the truth is, I really want to be an artist. I feel really called to do art, but my parents want me to be a lawyer. So that's what I'm doing, right? That's where we can start to see this, like, the need for authenticity really in conflict with the need for attachment. I need my parents to approve of me. I need my friends to approve of me. And again, the way this feels really important to living in a social context is we live in a social context because what it means, again, to our brain science and where the biological wiring for connection comes in is we need to feel accepted by the tribe. Because evolutionarily speaking, if we were not accepted, validated, approved of, included in the tribe, we would be left alone to die. So there's really brilliance in that. But what happens when the tribe only accepts you at a certain weight, shape, or size, right? So we have this collective conflict of trauma around the attachment and authenticity need, right? And so again, this is stuff that I completely have lived through myself, but that's how it has everything to do with our relationship with body and food and everything. And so on one hand, the way that this can show up, right, is we're not eating when we're hungry, for example, because we want to be a certain weight, shape, or size. So we're not honoring our own authenticity. I'm hungry, I need to eat and honor my body. But it can also happen where we're eating where we're not hungry. We can eat and again, use other substances and behaviors to numb and soothe and avoid these feelings because it doesn't feel safe to have the thoughts that I'm having or have the feelings that I'm having. Our authenticity doesn't feel safe because we've been so conditioned, right, to be, act, think, feel a certain way. And that's how it plays out here, again, especially around food and eating. And so what I think just specifically in this conversation is so important to look at is we get so conditioned to want certain things or to look a certain way, for example. And then we become, on top of that, so conditioned to be ashamed of that, right? It's like, I want to look a certain way, but no, I shouldn't want to look a certain way. And we're just battling and battling this conflict internally. And all of that is to say, it's all kind of getting in the way of us embodying our own authenticity. And so lastly, I will say that's the second bullet point. And if anything about that needs to be clarified or you want me to clear that up at all, please let me know. But the third bullet point, which I think also just kind of expands on this idea, is really bringing it home. That is the real problem. And the problem, when I say problem, I'm talking about overeating, undereating, mindless eating, stress eating, emotional eating, whatever the issue, chronic dieting, right? Compulsive weight loss, all of these things. The problem is really at the root of it, and hopefully now you can see this, is that we lack the safety. We lack feeling safe to think our thoughts, to feel our feelings, and to be embodied in our own authenticity. It's not a problem with food or eating, as we mentioned earlier. The real problem is that we don't feel safe to be who we are. Why? Because we grew up in a social context with an animal brain, and we were taught that if we have certain thoughts, it's dangerous. If we have certain feelings, they're life-threatening. If we feel sensations in our bodies that we don't want to feel, we can just use substances and behaviors to get out of it. And all of it is really an invitation to come back home and come into the body and actually practice embodying authenticity. I am safe to feel my feelings. I am safe to think my thoughts. I am safe to eat when my body is hungry. And I'm also safe to put the food down when what I really need is an emotional solution rather than a physical one, because we can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. And so the real problem, again, is just not feeling safe to tell the truth, not feeling safe to be ourselves or be present in our bodies in the moment. And so the solution then is not to do with food and eating or just with food and eating, but to really start practicing feeling our thoughts, feeling our feelings, thinking our thoughts, and being present in our body to be honest and just really be who we are ultimately. And so the way to do it, okay, and we're going to start practicing this together, but I want to just introduce, now that you've learned all of that and we've gone through these bullets together, I want to be really clear that the way to do it, right? If you're again, anything like me, you're like, all right, cool, I got it, but what do I do about it, right? The way to do it, the biggest skill and tool and practice that you will have is to be the observer, the objective observer, okay? So non-judgmental awareness. This is a practice of really embodying conscious awareness and having an awareness and a practice. And again, we're going to move through this together really shortly, but to really practice being non-attached to your human experience. So what that means is when you have a thought, you notice it. You are conscious awareness. You see your thoughts and you say, hello, thoughts. I see you there. I am allowed and I am safe to think these thoughts. Same is true with feelings. Oh, I'm having a feeling. There's nothing wrong with me for having this feeling. I don't need to be afraid of this feeling. I am aware of this feeling, right? And because, as you well know, your emotions are energy that live in the body, same is true with somatic experience, right? Ooh, I'm feeling this experience in my body. Maybe there's a tightness or a contraction or a heat, right? Whatever it is that's moving through the body, I am safe to experience this. I'm observing my experience. Okay. And I was rewatching actually some of the last presentation I did for SERPA just to prepare for this. And I love what someone said. I wish I remembered her name, but I love what someone said toward the end where she was saying it was kind of like watching the circus of what was going on in my head. When you're doing this activity, I'll share with you shortly. She said it was kind of like watching a circus. There's so many thoughts, so many feelings, so many parts of me coming up. And I love the distinction. It really sat with me, the distinction between watching the circus and being in the circus. So if you're here and you're wondering, how do I do it? How do I create the safety to think my thoughts and feel my feelings and embody my authenticity so that food and eating can feel much more stable and safe to me? And how can I get my needs met? That's what I want to really just offer you as an invitation here while we practice this for a few minutes, that you are not in the circus, you are watching the circus. And the circus might be, a little chaotic or a little emotional or whatever it is, but you have the power to sit with that and be present with that. And that's the invitation. So as we're moving through this, I also want to remind you the mantra that works for me that I teach over and over and over again is there's a difference between being uncomfortable and unsafe. Okay. So when your thoughts come up and you notice, oh, I shouldn't be thinking this, right? If we respond to our experience with resistance or judgment, we're perpetuating the belief that it's not safe. And so any thought or feeling that comes up for you, just notice this is uncomfortable, but it's not unsafe. And when you have that as a practice or a mantra, it can really support you because that allows you to say, I can observe this and I can be present with this because it's uncomfortable, but it's not going to literally kill me. And the more you can practice that, the more safety you are bringing to your thoughts and feelings and body and present moment. And that is really, I think, the biggest power that we have as a spiritual being in a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context. Okay, so I am now going to first, I just want to check in one more time. Anything need to be clarified before we embark on a practice together? Anything not making sense? Anything that wants to be seen or heard before we begin? I'm also mindful of time. So, looks like not right now. Okay, great. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a few minutes to do this together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to prompt you with a few different questions. And what you're going to do, this is where if you have a pen and paper, take them out, or you can type on your computer, whatever is easiest for you. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you a question, and you are going to identify how you feel when. How do you feel emotionally when these things happen? I will say number one, this is number one. Number two, this is number two. And all you're going to do is pick out the feelings that resonate with you for that experience. To help us with this, Georgie, if you can share the feelings wheel. Thank you so much. Okay, so I hope you guys can see this. And I hope it's legible for you. And if it isn't, you can go to feelingswheel.com or just Google the feelings wheel and it will take you here. The reason that I'm sharing this with you is because many of us, again, we have an emotional vocabulary of like 3 to 5 words, but often our emotional experience is much more complicated and nuanced than that. So if this is the first time you're ever looking at a feelings wheel, I know it can be a little bit overwhelming. But I would say to start with what's right in the center. Okay, so happy, surprised, bad, fearful, angry, disgusted, sad. We can look at those. And then if you're feeling like, you have a general idea that when I prompt you, you have the feeling of angry, right? Start there in the center, and then you can work your way out for a little bit. I always say like the different flavors of anger, and you'll see betrayed, resentful, jealous, frustrated, right? There's all these different words. Some might resonate more than others. Okay. So that's how you use the feelings wheel. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to let me know. But using the feelings wheel to support you in this practice, I'm going to start with, again, just asking you some questions, and then we'll come back after a few different prompts. So the first one is I want you to authentically, honestly tell the truth about how you feel emotionally when you lose 10 pounds, or let's say 5 kilos or 10 kilos, whatever, it doesn't matter. How do you feel emotionally when you lose weight? And you can share in the chat box, but I will actually ask you to do this individually and privately, just so you have all the safety and freedom and permission to really tell the truth. I always like to remind people when we do this that no one else is going to see your answers to this. And so just taking this as, the first one, and just see what comes up and notice, right? Practicing being the observer. What is it like for you in this moment to identify your truth? Does it feel uncomfortable for you to own? It does not have to be a word from the wheel. No. If it's easier for you to just, spit out some words that feel resonant to you from your own mind, that's totally accessible and valid. Anything that helps you answer the question, how you feel when. And then again, just for the sake of time, we'll move on to the next one. And you don't have to identify every single emotion that comes up. I know some of these can be quite layered. But for the next one, how do you feel when you gain 10 pounds or 5 kilos or 10 kilos? How do you feel when you gain weight emotionally? And you might notice maybe you have a feeling in one area of the feelings wheel and a feeling in the other area of the feelings wheel. Maybe you have feelings in all parts of the feelings wheel. I notice that sometimes being authentic means allowing a lot of different feelings to exist at the same time. And that's a practice here too. If I'm moving too quickly, you can let me know. I just want to save some time for questions. So if we move on to the next one, okay. How do you feel when your friend loses weight and you don't? I always, again, like to remind you, no one is going to see your answers to this. So please really practice telling the truth, however comfortable or uncomfortable that might be. It's not unsafe for you to do. And that's really the practice. The other part of this that comes up often is noticing here, especially if there are any thoughts that come through that suggest maybe, oh, I shouldn't think this, or I shouldn't feel this way. Right? Noticing your own relationship to your own emotions that say, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to think this. I don't want this to be true for me. And again, just really softening into it and saying, this is okay. This is okay. I'm safe to think this. I'm safe to feel this. May not want to, but I'm safe to. To your brain, that's a very important distinction. For the next one, how do you feel when you see pictures of yourself? And again, just inviting you to be really present with yourself as you do this. So you're not completely jumping up into your brain, analyzing. But really just being present with what's coming up for you right now. This might be really emotional for you in real time. Often it is. And you have a contained, safe space for you to be exactly where you are as you are. And we'll do 2 more together. How do you feel when you arrive at an all-you-can-eat buffet? When there's all the food in the world right in front of you and you have easy access to all of it, how do you feel emotionally? What's going on in your body, in your system? What thoughts are going through your head? How do those feel? And then the last one, maybe it feels connected, maybe it doesn't, to the last one. How do you feel emotionally when you eat uncontrollably? How do you feel emotionally? And you might notice for some people, there are certain emotions that come up before this happens, during the act, and then different emotions that happen after it's over. So if eating uncontrollably is something that you have experience with, maybe just feeling for, the different stages of that experience can bring up different emotions. Maybe it doesn't, but just inviting all of that to be present, whatever comes through for you. I'm just taking another moment here. Again, knowing you don't have to choose all of the words that resonate. There are probably many of them. And then as we begin to kind of wrap this up, those are all the prompts I'm going to ask you to move through. If you were writing or typing out in real time, what you probably have now is a list of emotions. What you probably have now, if you're looking at it and reflecting at it, or reflecting on it, is quite a roller coaster of emotion, which is usually what this turns into for us. And so I want to kind of close this practice with just an awareness of what this brings up for you, all of it. What is it like for you to move through this activity and really honor your truth. That is, you have a lot of thoughts about this. You have a lot of feelings about this. Maybe there's a lot going on inside just moving through this. And so just taking a moment, maybe closing your eyes, just taking a deep breath, coming back inside your body, and noticing what comes up for you just in doing this. Allowing yourself to feel what is present here. Maybe this is quite confronting. Maybe it's not. But just noticing that you are having an experience that may be uncomfortable. But none of the thoughts that you're having about this are unsafe for you to think. And none of the feelings that you're experiencing around this are unsafe for you to feel. And so when it comes to all of these parts that are present, right? Maybe it feels like there's a circus that you're watching about everything that is coming up around this. When you wonder, what do I do about it? You are doing it. The practice here is to see and hear and validate and feel and express what is really true for you. This is what it means to embody your authenticity, to know that you can think your thoughts and feel your feelings and that they're not going to kill you. And so when you are in this, the last thing I want to leave you with in practice, and I would walk you through more of it if we had more time, is just really a moment and an invitation for self-compassion. Okay? When you're sitting with this and anything that is coming up for you and present for you around this, when you notice that it's uncomfortable, when you notice the feelings, when you notice that it feels hard or scary or emotional, the question I want to leave you with is, how can you be kind to yourself? And sometimes that could be physical touch, holding your own hand, placing a hand on your heart, wrapping yourself in a hug, invitation to do any of those things if it sounds like it resonates right now. And sometimes that just means taking a deep breath. And sometimes that means, especially when it comes to your body and food, getting off your own back. Not shaming yourself, not judging yourself, not blaming yourself. You are a spiritual being having a physical experience with an animal brain in a social context. It's hard enough. You are carrying enough. The best thing you can do is be on your own team. And the best way for you to do that is practice being the non-judgmental, objective observer of your thoughts and feelings and experience so that you can bring more presence and safety and stability into it. And the same is true with your relationship with food and eating. So that is what I have for you today. That is what I wanted to share with you today. Georgie, I'm complete with the feelings wheel. Hopefully everyone here is as well. And so I know we have a few minutes. My first question, Georgie, for you is, do we have time to go over? Are we allowed to go past 90 minutes?
We can go over a little bit if you've got time. Yes.
Okay. So I totally have time. There's usually more than 5 minutes left. But so having said that, everyone, what I really would love, if you're open to it, is just sharing any reflections in the chat box. How did that go for you? Like, what was that like for you? What's coming up? Anything that wants to just be seen, heard, shared here together. And then any questions that you have for me. We can do reflections and questions kind of together. And then I will scroll up to the question that came through before.
Yeah, that was Scott.
Scott. Okay, Scott says, is there any correlation between weight loss and reduction in TMS symptoms, chronic pain? Thank you, Scott, for asking this. So it's interesting because just like in my, part of the reason I love this work personally is because every human being has their own very unique relationship with food and eating and their bodies for a lot of different reasons. And I think the same is true around the correlation relationship between weight and TMS, chronic pain. For me, there certainly was a connection, right? I had an extreme rapid weight loss and boom, almost immediately I started struggling with IBS. So again, energetically, that makes all the sense in the world, because for me, in my experience, it was almost like my primary coping mechanism as a child was eating, food, denial, dissociation. And then my coping mechanism was dieting and weight loss and control and denial and dissociation. And then when I couldn't turn to either of those things anymore, because I was really focusing on restoring my health, boom, all of a sudden I had this chronic pain show up. So again, just energetically, that makes a lot of sense, that became kind of the next distraction mechanism, right, for me. But I say everyone has their own experience with it, because I've seen it now working with a lot of people who do have chronic pain symptoms. I've seen it show up a lot of different ways, where sometimes the food and the weight stuff will kind of get harder or more of a struggle, and the chronic pain will come down, almost like a seesaw effect. And sometimes it feels like for some people, the food and the weight issues really ramp up as the chronic pain ramps up. For some people, it's that when they have chronic pain symptoms, because the pain and discomfort of that is so intolerable, they use food and eating to cope with that. It's like, so I've just seen, again, in my years of working with people in this community, that it really, yes, like to me, my answer to this is yes, absolutely 100%. There's a correlation, but it manifests differently for everyone. And so sometimes, it just depends. But I think if there's like an inkling in you that your relationship with food and eating has a connection to chronic pain, follow that, follow that. Be curious and open to really exploring that, because there absolutely is a lot there. It's just about figuring out what that is for you and what you need around that. I hope that answers your question. Scott, let me know if it doesn't. Christina, thank you. I'm so glad this was helpful. Anne says, I'm really quite struck by how much negative emotion I have in relation to this. Thank you for sharing that. And I know this came up in our last SERPA call, where that's like the number one thing that I hear when I do this activity is, I had no idea how much I was feeling about this. And a lot of what we talked about in the previous call was, again, I think with food and eating, because it's so connected to our culture and our society, our relationship toward ourselves in this area is so just neglectful, and not intentionally. It's just like, oh, everyone deals with this. Oh, this is just the world we live in. This is just what it is, like it. And so we don't take the time and space to really honor that there's so much emotion wrapped up in it, and that's why, if we're trying to address things with food and eating and calories and exercise, it's like we're neglecting all these other parts of us. And when we're in neglect of our own experience, it really can send the message to our brain that we're not safe to be here for it. And that's really kind of the takeaway message that I want to leave you with, So I really appreciate you sharing that. And thank you for being open to exploring that with yourself. Matthew, yes. Stay curious. Stay curious. That is it. Thank you so much for being here. Christina, any book recommendations helping people learn about spirituality? Ooh, that is a good question.
I'm going to pop a couple of authors in there, if that's okay.
Please.
So Michael Singer and Eckhart Tolle.
Yes.
Definitely very good about the spiritual side of things.
I would agree with that. There's nothing else to me that like really comes up immediately. I wish I had more to say on that. I bet you as soon as we finish this call, they'll pop into my head. That's usually how it goes. But
well, I think for me, I know quite a few, but I think those are probably the best going into it.
Cool.
And I mean, Michael Singer, they both do podcasts. They both have books, and they're definitely Michael Singer's books, lovely and easy read, and gently. I love the way he talks about conscious witnessing. So like you were saying, noticing what we're feeling, being aware, he calls it conscious witnessing. And I love that. And that, again, is about not being involved in it, but observing your thoughts, your feelings, and everything.
That also reminds me of Ram Dass. I think about Ram Dass a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And my children,
Some
yeah.
of that was eye-openingly tough, but really interesting and lots to think about. I think eye-openingly tough is really well said.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so I know we're at time. Does anyone else have any other final questions? I will share with you here. I can pop these over to you, Georgie, to share in the chat. These are just some links. So what I'm sharing with you is my website, my Instagram, which is probably the best place to find me in terms of social media, and my email. If you want to email me directly, please feel free. And then my podcast. This week, we just reached our 100th episode of the podcast.
Well done.
So thank you.
Fabulous.
So if you do want more of this, and you want to learn more about all this work, there are literally hundreds of hours of content for you to dive into and explore. And I welcome you to do that. So
fabulous. I love that comment. Thank you for that. I really enjoyed that exercise, bizarrely.
Bizarrely, yes. And that I think, I mean, it's brilliant, and it's such a testimony to the mind-body system that, like, part of us is like, oh, I hate this and this is so hard. But there's something really expansive and therapeutic about just, this is what it is. Like, really taking time to practice telling the truth, right? And that is the most healing thing we can do for the mind-body system. So
sit back and not try so hard, but to let go and just to notice. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. That was, as you can see from the feedback, absolutely wonderful. I knew this would be a popular one, and it will be up there on the Facebook page. We'll put it on our YouTube channel as well. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for those who are watching it afterwards as well. And most of all, Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you, Georgie. Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming. Stay in touch.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.